Cornwallis to me represents white supremacist thinking.
The statue just represents the founder of our city of Halifax.
It's outdated and it needs to be maybe removed and taken down.
I think a community that has empathy and that truly wants reconciliation would be willing to put a statue in its historical context in a museum.
For me, the Cornwallis statue represents a barrier to building that relationship with our Mi'kmaq friends and neighbors. Stop.
Well, Edward Cornwallis was the first Halifax-based governor of Nova Scotia.
His biggest event before he came to Halifax was the Battle of Culloden. This was a big battle between the sort of Catholic and Protestant forces in Britain. They want this to be the last time that the Highland Scots, the Catholic Scots, ever rebel against the British Crown. So to do that, they carry out what they call the pacification of the Highlands. They chased off livestock, burned fields, massacred people in villages, mass campaigns of rape. It was a very violent, deliberately violent campaign that the British government was quite satisfied with because it did crush the rebellion completely. So for Cornwallis, this is a successful campaign. He comes back to London and he's given his next assignment, which is to found the city of Halifax in 1749.
When Cornwallis led the expedition in 1749, what they were doing was not re-entering a British space of Nova Scotia, but essentially attempting to establish an outpost within Mi'kma'ki. So that was an inherently provocative kind of action to take. And Mi'kmaq leaders very quickly after Cornwallis arrived sent a message to say that the British invasion of that space was not welcome.
His plan for the Mi'kmaq from the start was to drive them off the peninsula of Nova Scotia, mainland Nova Scotia.
He wanted the Mi'kmaq to declare that they were subjects of the British Crown and that the British Crown owned all Mi'kmaq territory. So they refused to do so, and the Mi'kmaq, I think it was on September 23rd, 1749, reissued their declaration of war against the British.
When they expand again over to what's now Dartmouth, Cornwallis builds a sawmill over there. And the Mi'kmaq take that as another act of aggression, and there's a clash. It's not really clear what happened, but from British records it looks like a Mi'kmaq party of young men attacked the settlers there, killed several people. The settlers fought back along with their soldiers, killed several of the Mi'kmaq people. And Cornwallis decides that this is going to be the act of war that triggers his retribution.
And in response, on October 1st, Cornwallis met with his military government. At that meeting, they decided that they would make an attempt to exterminate the Mi'kmaq on Peninsula Nova Scotia and, by issuing a proclamation for the Scalps. The Scalp Proclamation was simply an order by the military government in Nova Scotia, the Cornwallis one, and it was for the purpose of eliminating the Mi'kmaq.
Any Mi'kmaq person who was brought as a prisoner to Halifax or whose scalp was produced as evidence of that person being killed would have a bounty rewarded.
I found records that I can say definitely dozens of people were killed, and probably dozens at a time. There are accounts of attacks on a village in the Digby area in 1759, where a troop of rangers attacks the village early morning before anyone wakes up, targeting the oldest people first and the weakest people first, and then going after the warriors.
Cornwallis had a record that was indefensible in my opinion.
In historical terms, certainly in my estimation, I mean, Cornwallis is not a particularly significant historical figure. Cornwallis was a short-lived governor. In terms of the set goals and instructions that Cornwallis came with, was not a successful governor. And so there was no great surprise that Cornwallis didn't, at the time, leave a particularly strong memory or recollection of his role as governor.
After he leaves here, he falls off the history pages, and it's not until 1899 that he's revived. Nova Scotia is a generation into Confederation then, and some people here are looking for a sort of national figure who they can hold up as a great Halifax figure worthy of a national presence. And they pick Edward Cornwallis as the founder. So he's kind of dusted off. There's historical papers written about him. There's a campaign to build that statue, which finally goes up in the early 1930s. And it's to celebrate the achievements of the British race, to celebrate colonialism. And the opening, seems to have been a beautiful ceremony. There's aerial photos showing hundreds of people sitting in what's now Cornwallis Park for the unveiling of it. And not a hint of controversy about it at all. Not the slightest whiff that Mi'kmaq people exist or could have any other perspective on it.
The idea was that the Cornwallis statue would, in a sense, be a kind of focus to bring people to Nova Scotia and to Halifax, and to be an economic contributor. And a factor which was closely allied to that was the involvement of Canadian National Railways, which was in the process in the late 1920s of building its new station with the hotel, to be known as the Nova Scotian Hotel, and also with new passenger terminals for ocean liners just behind the station. So the idea was that the park, to be known as Cornwallis Park, with its statue, would form a kind of complex that again would be attractive to tourists, but also would have a financial and economic spin-off for Canadian National Railways. So that in effect, Canadian National Railways ended up paying most of the bill for the Cornwallis statue.
Having spent a lot of time thinking and researching Cornwallis, having heard John Reid, the Professor Emeritus at St. Mary's, present at a conference that the Goresburg Institute put on about how Cornwallis became a hero of empire, and that there was that whole process as the empire started to unravel from the 1890s to World War II of looking for colonial heroes and then making them heroes and promoting them as, like, you know, examples of great Britishness or whatever. And that, you know, until the 1890s, for 150 years, nobody in this town cared about Cornwallis. There was no statues, there was no talk about him as the founder, that history, in fact, was actively rewritten to put him in that position.
So that the revival had everything to do with the concerns of the imperialists of the late 19th, early 20th century, and in effect very little to do with any historical analysis of the 1750s.
I hope my time starts now. I move that Council request a staff report with recommendations regarding a public engagement process to review and advise Council regarding possible changes to the commemoration of Edward Cornwallis on municipal assets, including Cornwallis Park and Cornwallis Street. I so move.
A letter came to Council in February, I think it was, of that year, 2016, asking that Cornwallis Street be renamed. Then a letter comes from the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center to the mayor's office saying, how come you haven't done anything yet? 6 weeks later, how come you haven't responded to us? So you're up against the wall, right? And you know that it's not right for us to not have a conversation about changing the name, right? That is classic colonialism at its worst. No, we're quite fine. The name of the park is correct. Thank you, right? You're not going to do that. You're going to have that broader conversation. That's what reconciliation should be about.
I look forward to your support in this motion, recognizing that this is not the start of an easy path. It's the start of a hard path, but a needful path. Thank you.
At the time, I felt like it made us one of the most racist and intolerant places in Canada. And it was probably the greatest personal defeat for me. It's been very interesting, not exclusively, I wouldn't say this is a universal thing, but a lot of the politicians who've been around the longest just don't, like, this is not an issue that engages them or they have a lot of experience with.
I personally believe that Cornwallis, he may not have been a perfect figure in history. You know, the only one that was where you ended up crucifying him. You know, and I probably offended somebody just by saying that as well.
Not everyone's perfect. And I said the only perfect person we ever had in this world, they crucified him. So the question is, you know, all our histories, we have some dark parts of our history, as well as some bright parts. And hopefully through this experience, we can share all of it. Well, I personally believe that Cornwallis is a fact of life, that he was the founder of the city of Halifax back in 1749. I believe that his statue should be kept in a public place. Having it taken down and put in storage, I believe, is disrespectful to the history of Halifax itself.
You know, Cornwallis is the founder of this municipality, this area, and we can't ignore that. To have a statue taken down, I won't accept that.
Well, they talk about where he's currently at Cornwallis Park, down in front of the south end of Halifax. I don't know what the significance of that park is down there, but I thought, why not have more of a symbolic place on the waterfront, close to where he came aground back on June 21st, 1749.
I'd rather have them in a more visible, more prominent spot. And if it's not good down there, then bring them up here to Grand Parade. Because if the founder of our city, Moses, be on the footsteps of the City Hall.
Very pleased to welcome our Poet Laureate, Rebecca Thomas, to come forward and recite a poem for us. Welcome, Rebecca.
So I feel the need to preface this. When I'm done this mandate after this last year, I go back to my community. I don't stop being Mi'kmaq. I am a Mi'kmaq person from start to finish in this life. And so when I have these opportunities to speak on matters that are important, that are awkward, that are controversial, I will take that opportunity to do so. I assure you that I have heartsick love poems and poems about the mundane and the beautiful parts of nature scrolled away in my notebook, but this is not a time and a place for those poems. And I promise you that you will hear a lovely poem at one point in time that doesn't challenge you in where you are, but this is not that time. I research my poetry. I don't just write off the cuff. I put a lot of research, and I have a lot of education and background in the stuff that I speak. And so at this time last year, I was engaged in a very visceral conversation about a Halifax City motion. And I intend to revisit that through this poem. And so this poem, to begin, I'll just get right into it. I'm as sweaty and as uncomfortable as I'm sure some of you are in anticipation of this. So we'll get through this together, I assure you. It's entitled, Not Perfect. I don't shower every day. I'm not perfect. I sing off key when I drive on the highway. I'm not perfect. I have a dedicated husband, but still fall in love every day. But hey, I'm not perfect. There are a lot of things I can forgive and understand as human error, but not a single one of those comes in the form of inciting racialized terror, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but a lack of perfection is a poor excuse to keep Cornwallis enshrined regardless of his abuse. Please cut him loose. Do you get what I'm saying? Or is my argument obtuse? How can granting us, our humanity, be any less of a priority than making the donair the official meal of Halifax City? It's a pity that late-night drunk foods get to be classified as today's most current issues. Where are our statues? May I suggest a few? Anna Mae Aquash, Donald Marshall Jr., or Grand Chief Member 2. See, they all meet the criteria of not being perfect. They're a group of real apple tree serpents. Anna Mae, a divorcee. Member 2 and Marshall, a rebel Catholic and a criminal. Maybe that last one ended in an acquittal, but it's because the world thought ill news words were too brittle to be believed. And it's not news to me. We have already whitewashed our streets to rinse off our red-stained hands and feet. In that park, all paths lead to his bronzed greed. I beg and plead, can't you see what I see? That a man decreed a proclamation on our scalps. I'm taking you to task. I'm asking for your help to heal generations of spiritual welts because we were seen as animals only valued for our pelts. But today, we are members of your community. take my extended branch in unity and stop honoring a man who prided himself on his limitless brutality, who counted Mi'kmaq fatalities. Our skins were used as currency. His legacy built on the belief that our vagrancy justified replacing our only home, Mi'kma'ki, with a British colony, hell-bent on extinguishing our existence. But we are persistent. Centuries later, we are still mounting a resistance because no amount of hubris can strip us of our resilience. We are still here. I can't make that any more clear. Don't fear a rewriting of the past, but rather how it looks when this decision is recorded in the history books, when you turned a blind eye and spied the easy way out, when you flexed your privileged clout in a bout with a predetermined outcome, because at that time there was nobody in that room who looked differently than you to challenge the status quo. The same old, is this how Halifax chooses to be bold? Did you know that the West looked to the East on how to rid themselves of the indigenous beast? They looked to this coast to justify killing kids. They said, and I quote, "All lice grows from nits." And if even only a fraction of this were true, is this the statue? Is this the legacy you want immortalized in a statue? And who here wants to be the one to explain that to my nieces and my nephews? It's time for minds to be changed and pride to be checked. It's time that our voices are given a lot more respect. I will not fault you for a change of heart on the subject. Together, we can find a compromise and work it, because at the end of the day, I recognize how hard it is to be perfect. Thank you so much for listening. Walale.
So I felt great about it, and I gave Rebecca a big hug for what she did, and and this is what we need. We need Mi'kmaq get in a position such as she held, or has, I think she still holds at this point in time, and having the courage to speak up.
It was powerful, it was moving, and at the end of that I jumped out of my seat and I applauded like heck, because she challenged us as counselors to deal with this now. And so it would have been remiss as me, both as a counselor and frankly as a human being, if I didn't sort of address it at that time. So at the end of our meeting, there's in our agenda, we have notices of motion, and I thought, well, I'm going to have to give notice that I'm going to bring a motion forward at our next meeting.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that Halifax Regional Council, in the spirit of the Council-adopted Statement of Reconciliation of December 8, 2015, request a staff report with terms of reference and a recommended composition for an expert panel to review and advise Council regarding any changes to the commemoration of Edward Cornwallis on municipal assets, including Cornwallis Park and Cornwallis Street, and recommendations to recognize and commemorate the Indigenous history in the lands now known as Halifax Regional Municipality.
One of the things that I framed the motion with, is sort of the preface to the motion, is that this is all about reconciliation. Well, so on this motion, and why I brought it forward, because I didn't want to bring it forward to have to vote it down again. That wouldn't have been good. And I had a very good feeling that it would pass this time, because we had 4 people who had been removed from council that had voted against it last year. And in fact, one of the councillors was the one that I replaced in the election in 2016.
Elections work. How's that?
These 4 councillors weren't there anymore, and we had 4 new, fairly progressive voices around the table. I was probably going to get those 4, and where the motion that Wayne Mason brought forward only lost by, I think, was 1 vote. I had a pretty good feeling the numbers were in our favor, but what I didn't account for was once we actually got to the meeting and heard the discussion, it was a very different discussion than the one that happened in May of 2016. A very different discussion. The discussion that happened in May was polarized, it was divisive, and part of that was, I think, the way it was introduced and the media coverage of Councillor Mason's motion.
The title that went out on that article, that was the one that was picked up all across the country, was, I always want to say smudge, but that's not right. Cornwallis, Halifax looks to strike Cornwallis from the record, or something like that. I wish I could remember the exact language. And basically, you know, the lead in the story was, we're going to erase his name, we're going to wipe him from history. And that was not the motion at all. But once something like that spins up out of control with the population at large, you can't change that narrative.
The pains of the past is not something that we can rewrite history.
It seems like to a lot we're trying to revisit or rewrite history.
You cannot change what happened.
We need to discuss this, but you don't need to start rewriting and changing history and trying to be politically correct all the time.
We cannot rewrite history.
It's one of those things people say so much that it took me a couple of years to think, well, of course you can. Like, you know, when I wrote the Cornwallis biography, there wasn't any biography of him, so I went out and did the research, and so we have a new chapter of history. But if this afternoon somebody finds his private diary hidden in the wall of his old family mansion, we would have to rewrite history because we would have more information.
When you consider rewriting history, and this motion certainly doesn't rewrite history, all it does is look at that history in a new way. We're looking back at the history we have and saying, what's the appropriate way to commemorate that history? We're not going to forget it, but do we want to honor that particular portion of it?
Who in the hell is talking about rewriting history? I think I just made a statement that you can't rewrite history. It transpired, but you can rewrite history to the effect that you're revealing the actual facts, how they turned out.
The debate is not so much about history itself, but about historical memory and the way that people in 2017 choose to remember and choose to commemorate the past, and whether they choose to celebrate it or not, and if they do, what kind of elements of the past do they choose to celebrate.
And what the statue today represents, I think the pro-Cornwallis people, the people who really feel strongly about him, see it as the foundation of this place here. And that tells you that this is a European, British-founded territory, and that's what it fundamentally is. That's its truest identity. And whatever happened before that is not as relevant. For the anti-Cornwallis people, they see it differently. They see this as Mi'kma'ki, as a 13,000-year-old human settlement, civilization, growth, that the most recent 500 years have been the story of European involvement, but that it's defying that ancient history, and it's basically saying nothing existed before Cornwallis set foot on this shore.
Going to school, we were taught that we were from inferior civilizations, cultures. I think to us it sends a message of white supremacist thinking, okay? Simply put, what the white man done was the right thing. They had a right to do it.
It is significant that the Cornwallis controversy is not an isolated controversy. We've seen we're discussing this in late June of 2017, and we've just seen the renaming of the Langevin block in Ottawa for the reason that the individual after whom the Langevin block was named was closely associated with the residential school system. We've also seen recently controversies in the United States, for example, in New Orleans, over the removal of statues commemorating and celebrating Confederate figures.
We are a pluralistic, democratic, multicultural society. We are no longer the Dominion of Canada. The empire no longer exists. I think it's okay for us to have that conversation and reconsider how we present the guy who was the administrator when the city was founded. Hopefully we'll have the intestinal fortitude at the time to be bold and to actually tackle these issues.
Well, I think the statue, if I had my preference, it would be dropped into the deepest part of Halifax Harbor, but it's not my choice, so perhaps a museum would be the best place to put it. I don't know if I'll live long enough to see the statue go down, but I hope I do, and I'll be 79 this year, so I have some hope. Things have changed quite a bit.